So does anyone know who this man is? If you do, you can put it in the chat and Natalie can shout out if there's anybody who's got the right answer or any answers.
Nothing coming through.
Nothing coming through, fair enough. Okay, so this is, oh, Donald Watson. No, no, far from it, actually. This is Lewis Powell, and he was a lawyer and a future Supreme Court judge in the US who wrote something called the Powell Memo in 1971. And as a conservative, he was very concerned by the radical ideas being spread by the social movements of the time. And so he wrote this 30-page memo, which many have credited as a blueprint for the rise of modern neoliberalism. And he laid out a long-term plan to capture key institutions like the media and like universities and academia to reverse these radical trends. And his plan worked. Next. So if we want to get from the horror of where we are now, next, to a world where all animals are free to live as they choose, then we need our own version of the Powell Memo. We need a long-term movement strategy or roadmap, because transformational change isn't achieved just because it's morally right. We need a strategy that focuses our attention and energy so that we can actually achieve a meaningful breakthrough, rather than pursuing lots of different goals at once and not achieving a meaningful breakthrough in any of them. Next. Now, I realize that the animal movement is unique in many ways. You know, we're an ally movement for starters, and we're dealing with a massively complex issue, but we still have so much to learn from other social movements. Past movements have built unity and momentum around long-term shared goals. So for Indian independence, the goal was to kick the British out of India and to have self-rule. And this goal helped to create unity and some kind of cohesion between all the different efforts that were taking place. For the civil rights movement in the 60s, they focused on lots of different campaigns, but on two key areas, first on desegregation, and then they moved to voting rights. And for the LGBT movement, marriage equality was a big goal that has been achieved on the way to the bigger goal of equality under the law. And marriage equality was chosen as the goal amongst many other goals that could have been chosen. And it was chosen in part because the conversations that it catalyzed about love and family and commitment enabled people to shift their attitudes about gay people more broadly and open up opportunities to win further rights, down the road. So it was a very strategic goal. Next. So there is a difference between campaign strategy and movement strategy. And to achieve the transformative change that we want, we need to take a long-term movement perspective to imagine change across decades rather than across campaign cycles, where I think most of us are focused. And ultimately, movements are multi-generational. So taking a movement perspective means deciding which aspect of the issue we want to address in this generation and what foundation we want to build and leave for the generations that come after us. Next. So at Animal Think Tank, we are very persuaded that we need to take a long-term movement perspective to achieve the transformative change that we want for and with other animals. And over the last 16 months, we've been working to develop a 40-year movement level strategy for ourselves primarily, but also hopefully one that can serve the broader UK movement ecosystem. Next. So in this talk, I'm going to share, firstly, some of the key ingredients and guiding principles of good strategy that I've pinched from a lot of great resources. Secondly, Animal Think Tank's long-term strategy work over the last 16 months. I'm going to share our methodology. And finally, I'm going to share some of our interim results and insights that we've surfaced so far and share what's still left to be done. So as I said, I'm drawing from a range of really great resources, both sort of movement strategy books and also business strategy books, as well as drawing from interviews with movement strategists like Ivan Marovich from the Otpor movement, Evan Wolfson and Doug Hathaway from the Freedom to Marry campaign, and Paul Engler, co-author of This Is an Uprising. So the first half of this talk, there's not going to be any original ideas or any of my original ideas. It's a distillation of some of the insights that we've gathered through these resources and these conversations. Next. So firstly, what is strategy? There are, actually, when I was doing research for this talk, you'd think that I would have a really clear definition of what strategy is, but I had to get it from somewhere else. And I really like this definition from Practical Radicals, which defines strategy as a plan to achieve a goal under conditions of uncertainty with limited resources facing opposition. And Richard Rummelt, who's author of the classic book Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, says that strategy is essentially problem solving, and you can't solve a problem that you've not understood. Next. So what are some key ingredients of good strategy? Next. We need a diagnosis or an analysis of the current situation, which answers key questions like, where are we now? What are the key issues and what are the key opportunities? A good diagnosis is about fully understanding the nature of the challenge, and that really helps us to then identify opportunities for change. Next. And a really important aspect of the diagnosis is understanding power, your power and the power of the opposition, and finding ways to concentrate your power to achieve your goals. So progressive movements like ours often rely on something called solidarity power, and this is about building networks and alliances and collective action, to be able to amplify their voice and their actions. They often also rely on disruptive power, such as strikes, and they rely also on ideological power, especially when movements are aiming to shift societal values and norms and narratives. And influence cultural institutions. Next. So secondly, we need a clear, ambitious goal or vision for the future, which answers the question, where do we want to go next? So a clear and compelling vision is essential for organizing and mobilizing people towards creating a better world. And this vision should be rooted in universal human values and aspirations. So it really speaks to people's hearts and moves them to act. Next. And we need a plan from getting from here to there, which answers questions like, how do we get there and what steps are we going to take? And a good plan includes something called a guiding approach. It includes coherent actions, and it includes high-level goals or milestones. So a guiding approach. Good strategies have a guiding approach which marks the direction forward, but doesn't necessarily define all the details. So guiding approaches define your methods and help you rule out lots of other possible actions. So in a social movement context, this can be influenced by our conceptual or high-level theory of change. So for example, is our guiding approach about putting pressure on the system from outside through protest? Or is it trying to put pressure on the system from inside through lobbying? Are we focused on individual change, or are we focused on systemic change? Are we focusing on legislative change or cultural or narrative change? So Practical Radicals details 7 approaches, guiding approaches or strategies, which include base building or community organizing, disruption, narrative shift, inside-outside campaigns, electoral change, and so on. And they argue that you choose your strategy model or your strategic approach based on your assessment of your own power and the current context, and that really a combination of these strategies are needed to win, and that transformative change requires, each of these strategies at different times. Next. So in fact, every resource that we've consulted and every person that we've talked to, and our learnings from other social movements shows that we need a combination of methods to win. There is no one right strategic approach. And so this is Ella Baker. She was a legendary organizer in the civil rights movement, and she promoted a strategy of base building in the South, in the 1940s and 50s. And this really laid the groundwork for identifying and training grassroots leaders long before the big campaigns that we know about in the 60s, like the lunch counter sit-ins and the freedom rides. So, the civil rights movements, the breakthroughs that they experienced really depended on both, slow and patient organizing and these dramatic actions and campaigns. It also relied on working with legislators, registering voters, sharing powerful images to make moral claims. So, no single method alone would have worked. Next. So this is Evan Wolfson, a leader of the Freedom to Marry movement, and he's written a lot about strategy, and this is one of the main things he does now, advising others on good strategy. And he talks about social movement strategy needing to use many methods, combining various approaches like litigation, legislation, direct action, public education, and persuasion. And different moments in history call for specific combinations of methods. So our job as self-appointed movement strategists is to sense what combination of strategies or approaches are needed at this time and in this context, and then also sense when it's time to shift to other approaches. Next. So a winning strategy needs a set of actions that are coherent and coordinated with the guiding approach that we choose. That effectively address the challenges laid out in the diagnosis that I talked about earlier. And really, to have power, actions in the strategy should work together synergistically and build on one another. Next. And then finally, a winning strategy, as I said, needs milestones or goals along the way. Next. And these are really guideposts that move us along the way to achieving our long-term impact. And they really help to orient us and focus us. So for example, with Freedom to Marry, their overarching goal or vision was to win marriage equality at the Supreme Court level, but they aimed to build a critical mass of states and a critical mass of public support that together would create the climate for that Supreme Court win. And next, and as linear and logical as all of this is sounding, the reality is of course very different. And as Evan Wolfson said, we may be held up today as a model, but for most of it, it's been a muddle. So, while much of their work was very strategic, much of it was also about reacting to events and taking the opportunities that they saw. Next. Okay, so what are some key principles of good strategy? Next. So the most basic idea of strategy is the application of strength against weakness, or strength applied to the most promising opportunity. And two important sources of strength are, one, changing how we see a situation. So powerful strategies often come from these fresh insights, which can uncover new opportunities and risks. And then secondly, having a coherent strategy. A good strategy creates strength through the coherence of its design. Next. And given good strategy often comes from a new and surprising understanding of a situation, it might actually seem quite obvious in hindsight because it fits the situation so well, but it's based on unique ideas that maybe others haven't noticed. Next. And as I've said, a good strategy is designed to be coherent. So all of the actions need to be reinforcing and supporting each other. And I think this is really important. This coherence is a source of power. And so a lot of strategies, that we know about are not actually designed, and instead are a list of independent or conflicting objectives. So we have to be really, really careful to design our strategies so that the actions are coherent. And a similar kind of concept next. Good strategy is focused and not dispersed. So it involves prioritizing what is most critical. It's as much about what you don't do as it is about what you do. And Ronald Rummelt said in his book, strategy is about focus, and most complex organizations don't focus their resources. Instead, they pursue multiple goals at once, not concentrating enough resource to achieve a breakthrough in any of them. Now, I think this is really important and implies at the movement level as well. Are we trying to pursue too many different goals and issues at once and not actually concentrating resources enough to achieve a meaningful breakthrough in any one of them? I invite you to put your opinions about this in the chat. So people can be reading through. Okay, effective strategies, sorry, next, Natalie, also use leverage, which is about the smallest effort yielding the largest impact. And then a good strategy also is adaptable. It can adapt to changing circumstances and new knowledge, but within the guiding approach. And then finally, good strategy is just a hypothesis about what will work that can be tested and refined over time. Oh, sorry, next, Natalie. Next. Next. There's a bit of thinking going on. Okay, so, and ultimately we're operating in complex systems which cannot be fully predicted or controlled. Like, actually, we can't predict everything or even anything, I suppose, but by studying these systems, it really helps us to make more intelligent bets. And change in complex systems can be gradual, or they can be sudden and unexpected. Nothing seems to change until suddenly it does. And sometimes unexpected events create opportunities for major change that were once considered impossible. So we really need to develop our capacity to understand these windows of opportunities provided by events and build our capacity to take advantage of them. And it's often at these times when our long-term work of building our base, of transforming attitudes and norms, of building trust and relationships within the movement ecosystems, and building our own strategic capacity, and so on, can suddenly come to fruition. Next. Okay, so we've talked about good strategy principles and ingredients conceptually. And now I'll talk a bit about how Animal Think Tank's strategy work has been applying these principles and what we've been doing over the last 16 months. So our diagnosis has involved a range of analysis, a range of analysis and frameworks, and is a continuous process, really. Next. But one thing I wanted to kind of share is that one of the ways that we've understood the problem of animal exploitation is through three main forces based on David Nybert's analysis in Animal Rights, Human Rights, Entanglements of Oppression and Liberation, which is a brilliant book if people haven't come across it. And David Nybert talks about, these three main forces of economic exploitation and commodification of animals by humans and capital seeking profit. Secondly, unequal power with political and economic power concentrated in governments and corporations. And thirdly, ideological control through ideas, stories, and attitudes based on things like dominionism and human supremacy that allows the system to maintain itself. So that means that our long-term strategy really needs to make transformations in these three key areas. Next. Now, so we've got something around our diagnosis, and then remember I said we needed to have a vision. So our vision, which we've sort of written out really in our mission statement for Animal Think Tank, is that all individual animals have their rights to life, freedom, and bodily autonomy protected in UK law and embraced by society. So this means a goal of both legislative and cultural change. And remember, I said that a vision needs to be inspiring and move people to act. So I'm not sure how inspiring this is to the average person. So what we're doing is currently developing a broader vision that's rooted in human values and that can really resonate with and inspire people. And we'll be doing focus groups to test and refine that to make sure that it lands as well as it can. Next. And so we've spent the last 16 months then doing a range of consultations to surface ideas and opportunities to really think about what's the plan to get from where we are now to our vision. And we've consulted so many stakeholders from across the movement ecosystem, including leaders of organizations and legal and political experts, to help us to identify strategic opportunities and risks. books, and we've got advice from strategists and experts from other successful movements. We've also consulted the meat-eating public through focus groups to identify opportunities to leverage public opinion. And we've also gathered ideas from grassroots activists through larger workshops. And through all of these consultations, we have gained such invaluable insights and learned so much as an organisation. And in time, we really hope to share some of these insights with the wider movement in published reports. And also by consulting others, one of our aims was to build a sense of what we're now calling build-in rather than buy-in. So really getting people involved in the development and the methodology rather than handing them a strategy and saying, hey, isn't this great? And trying to persuade people that, you know, this is the way forward, but really taking a participatory approach as possible. And you know, we're feeling very grateful to have had such a lot of support and encouragement from players across the movement ecosystem, you know, many of whom recognize that we need something like this to help us really focus our combined efforts and achieve meaningful breakthroughs. Next. And ultimately, what we want to do is come out with a plan that's sort of simple and powerful. And we're using this framework from the International Centre for Nonviolent Conflict, ICNC. And the idea is that we have a grand objective, something that we're really aiming for in, say, 40 years. And then we have the strategic milestones or the intermediate steps that are crucial for achieving this grand objective. So the milestones could be things that we can achieve in 5 to 15 years. And then for each milestone, there'll be campaigns that help us achieve the milestone, and then tactics that help us achieve the campaign demands. And you know, this is ultimately what we're trying to populate for a simple but powerful strategy. And obviously, it's not as linear or as simple as this. And often, you know, many of the milestones and the campaigns will be happening in parallel, but hopefully coherently. And so if we think about other movements, you know, the civil rights movement, the goal was equality for, so the grand objective might be, you know, equality for African Americans, and their milestones, you know, we're focusing on particular issues or focus areas, desegregation, voting rights, and then they had a diversity of campaigns and actions within each issue. Yeah, obviously this is a simplification, but this is what we're going for. And so I'm just, sorry, next, Natalie. I'm just going to spend the rest of this talk, sharing, you know, some of the insights that we found so far. And I should say that we have a huge amount of data and we're currently still wading through it. And I can only really share a little bit of the analysis that we've done so far because of time. But hopefully this will whet your appetite for what's going to come, hopefully later in the year. So next. Through the consultations, several strategic pathways or themes have emerged which align with our theory of change and our goal of systemic change focused on animals. So I'll go through the pathways, but for each pathway, we've identified insights and strategic opportunities and risks. I'll share some of the pathways and opportunities we're looking at. So next, political representation for animals. So here we're talking about things like a commissioner for animal protection, similar to the Future Generations Commissioner in Wales. You know, animals are not represented in politics, and for some political theorists, this is the prerequisite to actually getting rights for other animals. And this came out through some of our consultations. And, you know, before this, I think many of us felt that it was, you know, we'd get rights first and then we'd talk about political representation, but it seems like it's much more entangled than we first thought. Next. So then animal rights was obviously another pathway that came out. So winning fundamental rights for animals, like the right to life, freedom and autonomy, rights that protect animals' interests, like the right not to suffer. And we're exploring pathways that evolve beyond the traditional sort of property personhood or welfare rights divide, drawing on more recent legal theory and scholarship, which has been new for us and is really exciting to see what might emerge from that. And I'm going to talk about this a bit more in a few minutes. Next. So a third pathway is, welfare enforcement and enhancement, like banning cages and factory farming, all of which there is a lot of public support for and can be used to push a more radical narrative to shift public opinion to see other animals as individuals. Next. And then another pathway is expanding, this is a bit more sort of legalese, but expanding the interpretation of what's called unnecessary suffering in UK law and society through both welfarist and abolitionist campaigns and welfare enforcement cases. And this is based on the idea that our idea of necessary and unnecessary suffering is actually continuing to expand over time. So, for example, cosmetic testing is no longer seen as necessary. Animals used in circuses is no longer seen as necessary. And this is the language that is used in UK welfare law of like, not causing unnecessary suffering. So what could we be campaigning for that would carry on expanding this definition and interpretation in law? Next. So we've got another familiar pathway to people. So, bans on particular practices or industries, whether it's animal testing, horse and dog racing, breeding of animal companions, animal agriculture practices like tail docking, or whole industries like focusing on beef or dairy. Next. There's a pathway of what we've called removing the money, so addressing subsidies, divestment, and also economic disruption through, for example, organizing workers. And also, if we link back to the welfare pathways by trying to increase production costs from, enhanced welfare. Next. Open rescue, we have reviewed legal opportunities for this approach and found some really interesting avenues for defence, as well as for movement building and storytelling. And as the UK welfare laws are so much better than the US laws, which is where actually this strategic approach is really sort of focused with, direct action everywhere, doing, open rescues and having legal cases. And it could be that there's an opportunity to argue that the whole animal agriculture industry is illegal and a criminal enterprise. So we're thinking about opportunities within the open rescue paradigm. And then finally, building movement power. And this is fundamentally about bringing more people into the movement to take action collectively and focusing on emotive and popular sub-issues that can really mobilize people who care about animals and build a broad and deep base so that we can build the power we need to make meaningful demands. And of course, we believe that this particular pathway is needed to facilitate all the other pathways. This is very much sort of an animal think tank's theory of change, that we really need to build movement power and people power to catalyze the opportunities and shift the Overton window so that other pieces of the movement ecosystem can be be pushing for more radical things. And of course, all of these pathways are connected, and many opportunities in one pathway can move forward other pathways. So it's not really linear at all. It's just the way that it's come out in the data and an easy way to explain or kind of slice up, what's coming out. And others probably could slice it up in different ways. Next. Okay. So as I said, for each of these pathways, we've identified insights, opportunities, and risks, and also campaign ideas and narrative shifts that are needed. Next. And as I said, there's so much data, it's really hard to go into now. We've got about 10 to 15 research reports sort of underway, but I'll whiz through some of the key insights and a few of the many things that are alive for us. So when we chatted with Paul Engler, co-author of This Is an Uprising, he told us that we needed to identify a popular sub-issue to polarize society around and push forward our narrative of animals as individuals with interests and inherent values. So next. So targeting policies that already have high levels of public support. So for example, banning infant mother separation, banning pig thumping, getting rid of hunting snares, ending breeding dogs for animal testing, and so many more. Next. And, as part of, trying to find these really popular sub-issues that can polarize society, we've been researching animal welfare practices which are both indefensible, so could cause moral outrage in the public, but also indispensable to the industry, so could harm an industry which is already vulnerable. And this strategy could help many pathways, from ending factory farming to furthering, fundamental rights and also political representation, by highlighting the need for a more robust animal protection structure within the government, for example. Next. We've also found that necessity is the most widely used justification, or one of the most widely used justifications for eating animals, and perceived harm depends strongly on perceived necessity. So one idea is that we really need to target practices, if this is an approach we're going to take, that cannot be easily justified as necessary. Next. Now, a key insight from our movement interviews and research is the necessity for a moral paradigm shift to achieve legislative progress and animal freedom. This isn't new. But the idea is that, this shift would entail society, like a cultural shift and a narrative shift, which, society would recognize animals as individuals with intrinsic value, rather than viewing them as property or commodities. And so our interviews suggest that campaigns and legal approaches, regardless of the specific strategy employed, should really try and emphasize the individuality of other animals and facilitate this narrative shift, which could then open up more opportunities for legislative success. Next. Another insight, which is found in the literature as well, but came up in our focus groups, which is that, people categorize other animals. They put them into categories like companions, wildlife, food or farm animals, pests. All of these I'm putting in scare quotes. This is something that needs to be broken down. So, in surveys, when people say that they think animals should have the rights, they're mainly thinking of animal companions. I've seen surveys where, really high percentage of people are saying, yes, animals should have the same rights as humans. But yeah, when you dig deeper, they think dogs and cats, probably not even cats, dogs should have, similar rights. And, whether people have had or currently have lived with animal companions really affects their perceptions of other animals. And, the majority of the UK has animal companions in their homes, and many of them see them as family members. So, one idea is developing narrative unity across campaigns around different species that could really help to dismantle these categories and help the public to move, for example, pigs and chickens from the category of food to the category of companion, or better still, family member, alongside dogs and cats. And, Esther the Wonder Pig is a great example of that already happening, and we need much more. Next. So we've also identified several legal strategies or pathways that could help lead us to fundamental rights for animals. And we're getting feedback from legal scholars on our ideas. And so far, there's been some good feedback, and that these ideas conceptually could work. And the stage we're at now is really trying to plan some sort of legal roundtables, or get some legal scholars and practitioners together to assess the feasibility of these ideas and how applicable they are in the UK context. And one promising strategy that I wanted to share, because it's quite exciting to us, is pursuing what's called simple rights for animals. For example, animal welfare protection, sort of reframing them as sort of these simple rights, which can then evolve into more fundamental rights, like the right to life, autonomy, and freedom. And this is an alternative to the sort of traditional route of going for personhood first. So next, so to unpack this strategy a bit more, in law, as I'm sure all of you know, that there are two types of entities: persons or things / property. And legal scholars have argued that achieving moral or legal personhood is a goal we should go for as a precondition for animals to achieve fundamental rights. Rights, like, as I said, the right to life, freedom, bodily autonomy. And this is called the traditional view, which is argued by people like Gary Francione and the late Stephen Wise. And it looks something like this triangle. Legal personhood is first, and then you get legal, and then you get personhood rights, and then private right of action, and then finally legal standing, where animals can, defend themselves or defend their interests in courts. So next. However, there's another view called the unorthodox view, which suggests that animals already have these simple rights, for example, these welfare type rights. And some of these can be strengthened into fundamental rights. So this is a more kind of, the paper it comes from is called Transition rather than Revolution. And this can be established through legislative change without the need to change animal status to persons first. And yeah, this comes from legal scholar Eva Kempers, who argues that legal personhood or an equivalent status is actually a potential consequence of growing animal rights rather than a condition for achieving them. And she's talking about this based on the idea that the legal status of women and children developed more in a similar manner to that, rather than, personhood first and then getting rights. And she outlines 4 steps, in this triangle. So it's an alternative triangle to the traditional view. So simple rights first, like, welfare rights, some of which can evolve into fundamental rights. And then what does it say? It's so small, appropriate incidence of legal personhood. I mean, incidence is a bit of legal jargon. Basically, we're talking about different rights, like I said, the right to life, bodily autonomy, right not to suffer, even the right to own property is an incident of personhood. And then the culmination of that is a personhood status or equivalent. And this is pretty exciting to us because it opens up lots of strategic opportunities to go for, say, a particular right or legislation that protects animals' interests, but that doesn't require personhood first. And it opens up an opportunity to try and evolve a simple right, say, that dogs hold, into a fundamental right. So, for example, a ban against tail docking could potentially be evolved into a right not to be tortured. And we are very much, this is a very conceptual argument, and we're in the process of exploring these opportunities and how to apply them in the UK context with legal scholars and practitioners from a range of different perspectives. So it's just ideas at this stage. But I think, this strategy can also help us bridge what many of us feel is an unhelpful dichotomy between welfare and rights, which I think undermines our efforts towards meaningful change. So by reframing existing welfare protections as simple rights, I think it could help with this. And many people also say that it's quite strategic to reframe to the public and also to legislators, to say, actually, we're not asking for something revolutionary, just an expansion of existing rights. Next. So focusing initially on winning rights for animal companions and then broadening to other animals also holds a lot of potential for us. So for example, expanding the ban against tail docking, for dogs, expanding that to pigs. Another strategy that's being used in the UK is chipping away at the property status of dogs before moving on to other animals. Ending testing against dogs, medical testing or chemical testing on dogs, and then expanding to other animals who are tested on, including animals who are usually farmed for food, like pigs. So this kind of expansion from animal companions to other animals also feels very promising to us. Next. And then finally, can we find a right or a simple right that furthers our narrative and our political strategy akin to, freedom to marry? So what we've learned from the freedom to marry movement is that Evan Wolfson chose marriage equality because it would be an engine of transformation to catalyze the conversations and narrative shift around love and commitment, and to show people the similarity of gay people and their relationships to heterosexual love. And by changing the way that straight people saw gay people, this would open up opportunities for further civil rights. So, could this be an opportunity for us to find a right or a protection that might not be the most important right or protection instrumentally, but symbolically would catalyze conversations and really get people to change the way that they see and relate to other animals as sentient individuals like us, and so open up opportunities for further, more fundamental rights. So one that we've been thinking about is reframing enrichment to the right to play, which could really speak to the idea of similarity between other animals and humans. Their innocence, joy, evokes childhood, and so on. And there are many of these, like the right to a mother, the right to a good life. So in our future focus groups, we intend to identify, what people feel is the biggest violation. So for example, being separated from their mother, not being able to play, and so on, to be able to then strategically pick those rights to campaign about. For example, freedom to play, right to friendship, social rights, and so on. So this is something that we're playing with. And if people have ideas, please do share. Okay, gosh, I'm almost through. So we've got all this data and all these insights. How do we make sense of it all to identify our grand objective and strategic milestone? Next. So just to remind us of the main themes or strategic pathways that I talked about earlier, for each of these pathways, we've identified opportunities and risks and campaign ideas and narrative shifts that are needed. And then each of these pathways have surfaced a range of grand objectives, things that we might want to achieve through these pathways in the next 40 years. And they've also surfaced many different options for strategic milestones. So there's milestones along the way to grand objective. Next. So, there are potential grand objectives like political representation, establishing membership rights for animals as co-citizens as one example. Next, fundamental rights to, can a grand objective be, the right to life? Could it be that simple for all animals, or just going for dogs and cats first and then to other animals? Next, abolishing property status for all animals could be another grand objective. Next, banning institutionalized cruelty within major sectors, so farming, entertainment, pets, animal testing. And then a sort of sub one of that could be ban factory farming, which much of the movement is focused on currently. Next. And there are so many possible strategic milestones that we could use to achieve these grand objectives. So I've put a bunch down here, but this is just a very small handful. So an animal protection commission established, that would be for political representation. Animal companions recognized as co-citizens. An Overton window milestone shift. So like 60% of the public see farmed animals the way that they see animal companions, trying to break down those categories. The right to play, or the freedom to play, as we've talked about. The property status of animal companions abolished. Next. Banning torture, unethical treatment and confinement, including mutilations. Open rescue recognized as a legitimate practice to rescue animals in distress, or could it even be that we go for the right to rescue like they're doing in the US? Banning factory farming, existing welfare laws enforced, a very boring one, but potentially, a very important one in terms of, disrupting and increasing costs in the system. And then, the unnecessary suffering clause dropped or amended, which we talked about earlier. So there's so many strategic milestones that we could go for. Next. So how do we make sense of this? Well, our plan is to develop strategy maps for each of the key grand objectives through collaboration with movement stakeholders. And these maps would represent the possibilities of how to achieve different grand objectives. And, they're not prescriptive. And by doing that, we can then assess the viability of different ideas and hopefully then review the different maps that are all, leading to different grand objectives, and identify key areas or nodes that we can leverage that can then push multiple pathways and our narrative forward. Next. So what do these maps look like? I don't expect anybody to be able to read this. I just wanted to show you, an example of some of the maps that we've created. And this is one potential map for achieving fundamental rights for animals, with sort of the text in red. These are the milestones, and then in purple, these are kind of focus areas. And then the arrows represent, A contributes to B, or A makes B more likely. Next. And this is the more detailed version. And I think there's an even more detailed version. So it's a bit complicated. But really, it's just a way to summarize and kind of summarize and play with a lot, some of these insights and ideas that have come up through our consultations. We've also tried to put our legal analysis into a high-level sort of legal map that shows the various legal strategies and possibilities to get us to fundamental rights. So both this legal map and the more campaigning narrative shift focus map, which we've put together that we showed before, these can be happening in tandem and working in synergy. And I don't have time to go into it now, but if it's of interest, or if you're a legal expert and you want to have a look and give us feedback on this map or any of the maps that we're producing, please do get in touch. And our plan is that both of these maps will be shared more widely soon to get feedback and to be further developed. Next. And even though we've done loads of research, it feels like we've just surfaced a whole load of new questions. And yeah, we're really left with a lot of questions, even though we feel that we've developed a much richer understanding of the opportunities and the criteria that we'd need to decide on the opportunities to follow. So here is, some of the questions, what are the popular sub-issues we could polarize around to shift the narrative? If we were to take a more abolitionist approach, what industry or practice is the most vulnerable to go for first? Do we need political representation before we can get to meaningful change in the law? Can welfare rights, or these simple rights, can they really lead to fundamental rights? Next. If we start with dogs, how do we transition, the movement or people who we've mobilized to also campaign about farmed animals? And, what is our equivalent to the freedom to marry? What is that for our movement? Does such a thing exist? And then I think something that's become very important to me recently is to understand is how do we amplify and accelerate what's already changing, what's already alive? So for example, in the UK, breeding dogs for animal testing has been the campaign in the grassroots for decades, and it's still, and with Camp Beagle and campaigns that are currently happening in the grassroots, that's where a lot of the energy is. Can we help to amplify and accelerate that? Another one that I think is really potent right now in the UK is, the opportunity to disrupt the humane myth with, the opportunity that groups like Animal Rising, Animal Justice Project, and all of the NGOs and groups that have done so many investigations over the last 16 years, showing that this, humane farms, high welfare farms, and this is a myth. I think, this is one of the strongest and most harmful narratives that's holding us back from moving away from animal farming. So is this something we should be amplifying and accelerating? So these are, all questions for us. So what are our next steps? Well, we want to develop and crowdsource maps in collaboration with others. We want to be able to then identify the key nodes and milestones and issues that these maps emerge from these maps, and to looking at all of the maps together. And then we'll want to do some focus groups to test the campaign ideas and the issue ideas that come out of doing that analysis of these maps. And again, so much of this process has been consultation, and so we want to continue integrating feedback from others. And then we're going to have to make some choices, and then the hope is that we can share a high-level plan at the end of this year. Next. I know I've drawn a lot on a few resources. We have to take, also just to say that we have to take all of these, take the good things from all of them, and leave the things that don't really apply. Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which is a great book, but it's about organizational strategy, not movement strategy. But it's a really good sort of conceptual book, I think. And then Practical Radicals, I really enjoyed this book, and I think the framing of these 7 different strategies and how all of them are needed, and it just really depends on your power and on the context, I think is a really good framing. Really, really good books, both of them. I would recommend them. And if you would like to carry on hearing about what we're doing and learning about the insights that we're coming across and inspiring us, please do sign up to our newsletter. Reach out if you'd like to learn more. And also reach out if you're interested in volunteering with us for discrete research projects. And also, please do check out our website as we're recruiting for several roles next. One in the strategy team and 2 in our narrative team. So you can go to our Join Us page. And before I wrap up next, I really want to acknowledge and emphasize that this strategy work that I've shared has actually involved so many people, both inside and outside of ATT. The work builds on the thinking and great work and inspiration of the pioneers of our movement, and it's informed by learnings from visionary leaders from other social movements. And so much work has been put into this by the strategy working committee at ATT. You can see a picture of us here, happy and tired after an intense 2 days of mapping. You can see the beginnings of the fundamental rights map taking shape behind us. And we're also building on the work and ideas of ATT members, and so many volunteers who've helped us, both past and present, all have made such invaluable contributions, and we really love working with volunteers. And we're so grateful for the time and expertise offered by the dozens of consultations that we've had with movement leaders and experts. This truly has been and is a collaborative effort involving so many people. And of course, finally, we are constantly inspired and motivated by the grace and resilience of our animal cousins. So to wrap up, I will leave you with this old proverb. We all need to hold big, audacious visions for transforming society and be willing to do what it takes to win in the real world. Thank you. So if people want to ask any questions, Natalie's. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Layla. That's brilliant. I think we've had some questions coming in, but please do keep sharing them in the chat. Thomas, you've actually got your hand raised. I know you've been contributing a lot in consultations with your expertise, so you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
While Thomas is unmuting, I just want to give him a shout out because it was a conversation that I had with him at the CARE conference maybe last year that really got me excited about the pathway of political representation. He's very persuasive.
Are you able to unmute, Thomas, to ask your question?
I don't have a question. Do you have a question?
Oh.
No. I just wanted to thank you again. Yeah.
Thanks, Thomas. Kimmy, I'm hoping you have a question. You should be able to unmute.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this this talk. It's really inspiring and hopeful. I have like a few questions, so maybe I'll just like focus on one first. I don't know which one to pick. Okay, so I'm from the US, and so the word polarized society like scares me, but I think you have a particular meaning by that. So can you like tell me what you mean?
Yeah.
I really like the idea of finding a strategy that like everyone agrees with and also would destroy the industry. Like I'm all here for it, but can you explain?
Yeah, no, I realize it's quite a loaded word. We the UK is also polarized, not as much as the US. But yeah, it's the idea that in order to really shift that kind of movable middle, we need to pick campaigns or issues that can really push the conflict out into the public consciousness, and ask people to pick a side, and really we want to positively polarize, so move more people towards us, and then push a very few people away from us that could really highlight, okay, we don't want to be that, we want to be this. That's a very sort of simple thing, but I really understand that polarizing in polarized societies is scary, and it's kind of a technique to try and move that sort of persuadable middle to pick a side and to move towards us.
Yeah, just to chip in, I think like Freedom to Marry is a really great example, because obviously they were voting on this and they knew either people were going to vote yes or no, and it's like they wanted to bring as many people as they could, and they did it in a way where they kind of had to polarize people, but in a way that would never shame people that were voting no. And it was always framing it as, you know, everyone wins if we vote yes, you know, America wins, love wins. So it's a way you can still polarize, but do it in a way that doesn't kind of shame and really divide people, I think. I think, Alex, you've got a question. Hopefully you should be able to unmute.
Okay. Yeah, great talk. Thank you, as always. RSPCA Assured is very quiet the last few weeks. So with the current Animal Rising campaign exposing their endorsement of factory farming, what do you think might happen next? Looking at other movements where we put people on the spot. And sort of building on that, Keir Starmer, as a young barrister, was helping the libel support campaign and beat the British government in the European Court of Human Rights, got them 57 grand compensation because they were denied legal aid and stuff. So we've got a new government on Friday, and you mentioned seizing opportunities. So thinking of RSPCA Assured or anything else, new government, what do we do next week?
Well, I don't know about what we do next week, but I would just to speak to the RSPCA Assured, you know, you're asking what happens next. Honestly, I think what happens next depends on us as a movement. Like, can we actually take advantage of the opportunity of, you know, that not just Animal Rising, Animal Justice Project is also running running campaigns, and all of the investigations that have happened over the last 16 years. Like, I think we as a movement, and especially in the UK at the moment, we need to get organized and figure out a way to really keep the pressure up, because I'm not quite seeing at the moment. I know that things are happening, bubbling away, but we really need to keep the pressure up and to really escalate, so that the RSPCA is forced to respond adequately, rather than, you know, the usual stock response of, oh, we will look into this. And I think, I think that's what I mean. What I'm worried about is that this could come and go if we don't do something to respond to the opportunity. So there's lots that people can be doing, grassroots, you know, the leafleting, the stickering, the, you know, doing outreach outside of RSPCA shops and shelters. I know that, you know, there are inside game groups who are having discussions. There are outside game groups having discussions about what we can do. So I would say watch this space. And in terms of the next government, I was thinking about this as well. And I was thinking about, in particular, I was thinking about animal testing. And, you know, I don't know if Tom Harris is on this call, but I've had lots of really good conversations with him. And I think there really is an opportunity if we can focus in the UK around the animal testing piece. In Labour's manifesto, they're talking about a roadmap to phasing out animal testing. So I think, we need to be thinking exactly as you're saying, Alex, what are the opportunities? And I know some of the NGOs have got cracked down on cruelty campaigns to really try and get stuff, get politicians to be saying, what are they going to do about these animal issues? So hopefully Labour does get in for the animal's sake anyway, not for maybe other issues.
Anna, you should be able to unmute hopefully and ask your question.
I just wanted to say thank you as well, because that was it's a good talk, but it's really just reassuring and gratifying to know that people are like doing this stuff and thinking about this, which is so important, and thinking about it in a strategic way. How do we actually progress in these areas? And there's so many things I could ask you about, but just so the first thing that struck me as an interesting area to pick out an overlap potentially between your sort of issues that are already in the public consciousness and these kind of sub issues that people that public might be kind of sympathetic to already, and these areas, which I think is a really good idea, thinking about what is indefensible and indispensable. So things that just can't really be modified, like that you can't have that excuse of, well, we just need to do this a bit better. It made me think about milk and cattle farming. And I've thought about that a lot anyway, because I've just quite recently been on a trial for a protest related to the milk industry, and we're in Crown Court and we're able to we actually had a lot of opportunity to, our judge was like very sympathetic to letting us speak at length actually about not just the climate crisis and like the impact of animal farming on the environment, but of milk farming, milk production on animals themselves. And because I have done a bit of work on this in a previous job, I worked on an inquiry that looked at genetic engineering techniques in farmed animals. So I'd done a lot of reading about cows. And so the thing that I picked, so it would have been good maybe if I'd come to this talk and be able to ask you this before the trial. Perhaps maybe that's why we all got convicted. But the stuff that I decided to focus on was stuff around two things, like kind of motherhood, like maternal separation, about which there's a lot of evidence. So I tried to sort of stress that there's actually a lot of academic work, or some academic work, like looking at the impact of mothers and calves on their long-term development, which I think a lot of people, it seems a bit strange, but I think it is true that people might be happy to eat the flesh of an animal that has been killed very prematurely, but they hate the idea that like a mother and a child might have been separated in order to do that. And I could sort of see that on the faces of like the jurors as I talked about that, alongside things around like artificial insemination, things that are just absolutely built into that. I don't think it's plausible. I mean, I might be wrong, but I see that as just something that it's just, you just can't produce milk on a mass scale without that. And the other thing that I talked about a bit was linking in with this question of like animals as individuals. It's work that's been done on like personality and differences. So not just kind of sentience, or some work on animals seems to be around, what kinds of things do cows do? What kinds of things are dogs capable of? I find it quite interesting, and I think I observe in people that I talk to about it as like potentially affecting. Animals of the same species are different from one another. They have different kind of personality, and this is something that anyone that has a companion animal kind of knows about cats and dogs anyway. They're like very, very different from one another. Again, it's a hunch because I don't really know, but that's from all the times that I've spoken to people that are not part of the movement. I feel like those are two areas. They're suggestions maybe to think about, and I'd be interested to know if you had thought about those potentially as issues that might be useful to kind of marshal in these conversations. That's quite a long question. Sorry, talking a long time.
Okay, sorry. Anna, thank you for all of that. And I would say I would love to chat with you if you want to have a chat about your ideas and share some of ours. So please do email me. But just quickly, yes, I think infant mother separation is a really potent one, and something we've been thinking about. It's lots of people have been thinking about this, I think. And then artificial insemination, yeah, both. I think we've talked about the fact that is kind of we can draw on ideas that are very sort of like in the ether around consent, and we've also been talking about like concepts like dignity, and how that is. So that, I mean, I think people would feel that really viscerally if we were to frame it in particular ways. So I'm very much aligned with you. I think these are really, really potent issues that I think I'm also going to ask Natalie if she's got any ideas based on the focus groups that she's been doing, because these are the types of conversations I think Natalie's been having. And then the second, abilities, animal abilities, personalities, unique individuals. Again, I think, yeah, we've talked about this a lot. Our narrative research, so I'm going to bring Natalie in onto this, but like one of our most persuasive narratives that we found, it's not exactly about like unique personalities, but I think it's very tangential, which is animal abilities and capabilities, and they're sort of awe-inspiring, capabilities. This was one of the most persuasive narratives that we found in our research. So I think there's a lot there to unpack. But yeah, Natalie, wondering if you wanted to just chip in.
I don't feel like I have much more to add. I feel like you summarised it well. I'm also conscious of time, and I'd love to hear Claire's question as well.
Okay.
But yeah, Anna, please do reach out to Layla, and happy to chat as well. That'd be great. Claire, you should be able to unmute, I think.
Hi, Claire. Oh.
Hopefully.
Yeah, you're unmuted.
Am I? Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Great. Yeah, thank you very much, Layla, for all that, and really interesting as always, and great to hear how your work's progressing. Just a quick sort of comment or watch note on a really big wider theme that's obviously massively affecting animals in the policy landscape and in the public consciousness, which is climate change. And I think that it features under several of your strategic pathways. Everything that you're talking about is obviously about progress for animals, about making the current really rubbish situation that we have for animals less rubbish, which is obviously what we all want. But I do think there's also, we shouldn't be complacent about actually things getting even worse, because oddly, climate change and the animal agriculture dimension is a bit of a double-edged sword, because although a lot of us are using it to sort of say, look, have less animals and have less methane, and using it as an argument to get in the door with policymakers to talk about animal agriculture, a lot of what we're getting back at the moment, not just in the UK but other countries too, is, oh, okay, methane's a problem, right, well, let's fiddle with the animals, let's put masks on them, let's genetically modify them, let's make them eat seaweed, a whole list of things that are worse for animal welfare, put them in sheds. We've got to rewild, so therefore animals have got to go in more intensive farms. So I think that climate change, we really need to be really alert to it, in your strategic pathways, where it touches on them, and just make sure that we're not actually going backwards in the course of our focus on trying to move forward, that we're actually allowing backsliding on on the climate change mitigation agenda. Yeah, that was just what I wanted to share. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. And I think that's really important. And I think with identifying opportunities and risks in each of these pathways, hopefully this is captured. And I suppose the other thing to say is I have farms basically based as you were saying about using environmental arguments, which could then mean people eating more chickens and all the things that we all know. And for Animal Think Tank, we're very much focused on trying to change people's relationship with other animals. So we're sort of focused much more on the kind of animal ethics side of things. So we're not focusing as much on the climate change or health angles. There's others doing that, even though obviously it's all very interrelated. So we want to be sort of working synergistically. But yeah, great point, well made and noted. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, I'm just conscious of time, so obviously if people have to leave, that's fine, but we'll stay on for a bit longer because we did start late. I can see you've got a hand raised, Camille. I will come to you in a second, but just want to shout out some questions from others. Jamie's got a good one. If there's time, I would love to hear about how sanctuaries for farmed animals fit into the movement. For example, how sanctuaries can participate effectively and opportunities. If you've got anything to say to that, Layla.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think sanctuaries for farmed animals fit very centrally into the movement and to many of these pathways, and especially if we're trying to change the way that people see other animals, change our relationships to other animals. And I think one of the ideas that we've been talking about is the need to really develop a micro sanctuary network in the UK. If we're trying to change the way that people see other animals as family members, disrupt the hierarchies between sort of animal companions and farmed animals, having micro sanctuaries where it becomes much more normalized to be sharing our homes with sort of less usual animals or animals who are usually farmed. I think all of this can only be a really good thing in terms of shifting perceptions. And I think currently sanctuaries, I think sanctuaries are very under-resourced and I think potentially underappreciated in the important role that they play in the movement in terms of holding a vision of multi-species societies and other ways to relate to other animals. And I wish that, I really would want all of that to be scaled up.
Yeah, there's also, I was lucky enough to see a preview screening of a documentary called Forever Home, made by a filmmaker called Alison Argo recently. And that's about a sanctuary, obviously, as the name suggests, but it kind of even pushes the narrative further about animal sanctuaries because the people who run it one of the people who's an architect, and he actually designed the whole sanctuary with their like clients, as they call them, their needs in mind. So it's really thinking about what do they need, them kind of co-developing these spaces with them. So I think, yeah, there's even kind of, yeah, narratives being pushed even further around sanctuary's place and that kind of co-creation, as Layla was talking about. Before I come to you, Kimmy, I just wanted to platform something Liz said, because it feels like an important point. She said, I'm glad you're showing the connection between animal companions with animals used for food. Depending on the target community, that comparison is more effective over making a comparison with humans, which can be interpreted as insensitive to some groups who have been labelled as animals to them to justify violence towards them. This has played out in the US, which I know where Liz is based, and has not been as effective at influencing changes in attitude towards animal protection. I don't know if you want to add to that, Layla, or if, yeah, that's.
No, I mean,
kind of
Liz is great point as always, Liz.
And Layla, yeah, lots of great comments, but we will leave it there. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. I put Layla's email in the chat for anyone who would like to reach out more, whether it's to volunteer, find out more about the research, share your ideas. Like Layla said, we always want to collaborate and hear feedback from others. So thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your days.
Thanks everyone.